Okay, great. Thanks a lot for the invitation. Let me share screen and get my slides going. Okay. Well, I guess I'll just jump right into it. So I'm going to be talking today about how we've been working with Coiled to adapt Dask to data-intensive climate research. And I'm going to be giving this talk together with James. Let me just introduce myself. So I'm a physical oceanographer and professor at Columbia University and Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. So, just to prove I'm a card-carrying oceanographer, here's a picture of me playing bagpipes on a research vessel in the Southern Ocean over 10 years ago. But the truth is I spend most of my time in front of a computer, and I've become very active in the open source Python world. So I'm a core developer of Xarray and Zar, and one of the founders of the PANGEO initiative, which I'll spend a lot more time on later in the talk, and in general have sort of adopted the role of an advocate for open science and open source software. So I know this is a really broad audience today. So I want to say a little bit about why working with climate data is a really challenging problem for data analytics. And I think it comes down to three factors: the size of the data sets that we work with, the complexity of those data sets, and the particular geometry of the Earth we live in and the way we represent that Earth in data. So sort of motivate this, here's an image of sea surface temperature. This is the sort of data I work with all the time and that I'll show in my demo. And here we're looking at a relatively coarse resolution image of the North Atlantic. And you can see it's pretty grainy, and we probably have thousands of pixels. That's sort of the older generation of data or models we would work with. Newer observations would have much finer resolution, showing us a lot more detail. And now we have billions of pixels instead of thousands to deal with in one of these images. It's also not just one. This is a process. The temperatures in the ocean are evolving over time. And so we have a time dimension. We might want to look at many different depths, right? So we could go down into the ocean, and this sort of multidimensionality of our data really increases the size of it a lot, such that we measure data sets in oceanography in petabytes. It's also complex data. So I showed you a temperature field, but really to study the ocean, there are dozens of different variables that are all interrelated. And we'll explore some of them in the demo. And also a lot of different, when we deal with simulations, a lot of different scenarios that we want to consider when we're modeling. And so this really explodes the complexity of the data. And then finally, we live on a sphere. We don't live in a rectangle, right? And so while I've showed you images and they look like rectangular images, that's just a visualization technique. And really, our analytical software needs to be able to account for this complex spherical geometry. And there's all kinds of different ways to discretize the sphere. And so, these are just some of the challenges that we encounter when working with ocean and climate data. So to make this a little bit more real, what I'm going to do now is jump to a little demo that I prepared that shows what it's like working with ocean data and using Dask to do some computations. So I'm sharing a notebook right now, and I'll just make this a little bit bigger. Maybe zoom in here a little bit. Is that working? There we go. Okay, it'll let me zoom out, but not in. There we go. So here's a notebook I prepared that I'm just going to step through. And I'm going to just, it's pre-filled here, but I'm going to leave it on the screen, and hopefully the steps will be pretty quick. So I'm going to show everything I'm doing is running in the cloud, Google Cloud in particular. And so one really great development in our field is that we've been moving more and more research to the cloud, which means we don't have to spend a lot of time downloading and collecting data. We can just bring our computing right to the data. And so here's an example of opening a data set from our cloud storage using an intake catalog using Xarray. And this is an Xarray data set, a multidimensional data set. And we can see we've got dozens of different variables in this, many of them very large, all contained within this one data set that I was able to open up really quickly. The total size of this data set is 6 terabytes. So this is a pretty big data set, and that's why we need Dask and parallel computing to work with it. So this is the fun slide. We're going to do a little interactive exploration of the data using HoloViews, right? Oh, and I guess I got to zoom out again to get this to fit, right? So I mentioned temperature. So here's an interactive visualization of temperature and salinity. These are two variables that we oceanographers care a lot about. HoloViews is a great tool that allows me to just zoom in, explore this data interactively. So here's one of my favorite regions of the ocean, the Agulhas, near the southern tip of Africa. And what we can do is we can just literally play with this data, look at these beautiful swirling patterns that we see, and I can step through this interactively. And that's possible because the data are stored in the ZAR format on Google Cloud, and this notebook is sitting right next to it. You know, these swirling patterns, these eddies, this turbulence, that's really the focus of my research. But the focus of this talk is going to be this sort of the data processing challenges around working with this type of data. So the calculation I'm going to do is actually inspired by the work that we've been doing with Coiled. You can see I have these two fields, temperature and salinity here. They clearly related. We can see a lot of the same features in them. And a general question that us oceanographers are interested in is, what is the relationship between temperature and salinity? And so in order to explore that, I'm going to create a joint histogram of temperature and salinity. I'm going to do that using this package that we develop in our lab called XHISTOGRAM. XHISTOGRAM is a sort of small, narrowly scoped, but very powerful package that can do multidimensional histograms on multidimensional labeled data, so X-array data, right? So here in this one line of code, I'm computing this joint histogram across the latitude and longitude dimensions of sea surface salinity and sea surface temperature. And this is going to operate using Dask, and we can see this is going to you know, produce some data that involves a Dask graph with almost 25,000 different tasks. Just to show you what this histogram looks like, I'm just going to compute a single value from the very first time step and give you a flavor for what we're trying to compute. So this is a fascinating little figure here. This is the joint probability density or distribution of salinity and temperature. And so we've removed the space from the data, and now we're in this probability space. And you can see these really interesting sort of fine scale features, right? So there's this, you know, really salty anomaly over here. This is a specific region of the ocean, and I invite folks on the call to guess, like, what region of the ocean might be represented by this part of the distribution. Over here, we've got this like clear line here of saltier water. That's the Atlantic. And then here, over here are the other basins. So we can see this clear sort of separation and a lot of fascinating structure in this. That's just for a single time step. But I've got in my data set, I have got 14,000 time steps. So what I really want to do is compute the mean over all of these different time steps of this distribution. And for that, I'm going to need Dask. So to sort of get things going here, I've created a Dask cluster using Dask Gateway. And what I'm going to do is use that cluster to compute the mean of all of these different histograms from every different time step. And I've just kicked off that computation, and we'll switch over to our Dask dashboard, everyone's favorite Dask feature here. And we're going to just look at how this cluster is going to process and chew on this data. So here we can see all of these workers, you know, essentially loading the sea surface temperature, sea surface salinity data, and working on it, reducing it, trying to get towards this histogram and processing it down. And so this is a very happy Dask computation we're looking at right now. We can see there's not a lot of communication going on. There's sort of efficient utilization of all the workers. We're not running out of memory. And we will now, I think, just pause this. It's gotten into this loop. Okay, I'm going to just restart this one. Just hoping it gets things a little better the next time around. Okay, so while Dask is chewing on this, I think we'll switch back over to the main part of the talk, and we'll let this process here, and we'll come back to it maybe when we get to the discussion, because it's probably going to take us a few minutes, maybe 5 to 10 minutes to get through this computation on all of this 6 terabytes of data. So let's see. Let me switch over to back to my slides here. Okay, so I showed you one particular data set, and that was the data set we happen to be working with. But in general, Earth system science is undergoing this explosion of data. So here's NASA's current Earth observing fleet of satellites that are measuring our planet, and this is their NASA's projected data volume holdings over the next decade, and we're measuring the data volumes here in hundreds of petabytes. So we really do have this crisis that is in need of analytical tools and solutions that can meet this challenge. This challenge is really what inspired us to start the PANGEO project. So PANGEO is an open science community focused on big data geoscience problems. And we sort of operate in this sort of mode of interaction where we bring science users and science use cases to the table and try and identify sort of what's holding back our progress. Is it software? Is it infrastructure? Is it education? And then we use that insight to sort of develop very broadly within the open source software ecosystem, contributing wherever it's needed to make progress, and then deploy these tools on high performance computing and cloud infrastructure. And so, this process has been going on for several years, and I think that we've really improved the software stack and are continuing to work this way to try and deal with these challenges that we face in our field. A lot of different participants in the PANGEO project, government labs, academia, universities such as mine, and a lot of companies involved as well, and now including Coiled, thanks to the collaboration that I'm going to mention very soon. So what does our stack look like? Getting a little bit more technical. So when we're working with big climate data in the cloud, we really think about a layered approach to our software stack. At the base is an efficient storage format that works well with cloud object storage. And for us, that generally tends to be ZAR. There are a lot of other great cloud optimized storage formats out there as well. Dask plays a very important role for us in that it is our parallel computing solution for a lot of PANGEO analytics. It is able to coordinate, distributed clusters and parallelize operations so that the user doesn't have to think so much about how they're actually going to scale out their code. Our users tend to write Xarray code as our high-level API. So Xarray is a sort of high-level API for analysis of multi-dimensional labeled arrays. And then at the very top are what I call sort of domain-specific micro packages. These are very specialized packages that maybe just do one or two things. Like we have a package for spectral analysis, a package that does these histograms. And ideally, these packages can just leverage all those layer below and just focus on the sort of specific science tasks that they have to do. And we generally tend to be working in an interactive, exploratory mode of analysis using Jupyter notebooks. So we love Dask in PANGEO because it provides this automatic parallelization of common operations. So this really frees up scientists' brain space to think about the science they're supposed to be doing and not the algorithms, right? Each of us only has so much sort of cognitive bandwidth, and if you're focused on the low levels of code parallelization, you're probably not thinking about how the ocean works. So we love that automatic parallelization. And we also really appreciate the flexible deployment options with Dask, right? We have a lot of users working on sort of on-premises HPC systems, other users working in cloud, and they all have essentially the same user experience. However, we tend to break Dask. Our workloads can really challenge Dask. We often have workers that run out of memory, clusters crashing, creating too many tasks. We often end up creating these task graphs with millions of tasks and poor communication patterns. And so some of these challenges that we were facing are what motivated us to really pursue a more direct collaboration with the engineers at Coiled. And that's what we're going to talk about for the rest of the talk, and hand it over to James on the next slide. I just want to explain how this collaboration came about. We in the Ocean Transport Group at Columbia received a grant from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation with a pretty broad mandate to improve the tooling around data-intensive oceanography research. And we decided a really effective way to spend some of that money would be to work with the Coiled open source team, sort of professional services, to make some improvements to both Dask and to our own tooling around Dask. So at this point, I'll hand it over to James for the next few slides. James, I'm happy to drive the slides, and you just tell me when you're ready to move on.
Sure, sounds great. Thanks, Ryan. Yeah, hey everyone, I'm James. Like Ryan said, and I work at Coiled. I'm a longtime sort of PyData member and Dask maintainer. So yeah, kind of.
James, are you able to get on video?
Oh,
by any chance?
Sorry. Yep, here I am. Sorry, everyone. Thought it. Thanks, Adi. I hadn't realized I had turned it off. So yeah, in general, like kind of echoing what Ryan said earlier, Dask works sort of out of the box for many different applications and use cases. And this is more the rule rather than the exception, but like with everything, there are always exceptions to the rule. In particular, like, you know, with Dask or any technology really, especially when you're sort of in a research context like Ryan and his group are, and many on the call are, you can push technologies to their limits. And you'll start to push up against sort of the variety of different limits, scalability limits, sort of just generally they're rough edges for any kind of technology. And this definitely happens with Dask, just like any other project. So what do you do in these types of situations is really the question. And I'm going to outline here 2 paths and kind of give examples of both of these approaches that Ryan and the rest of his group and folks at Coiled took. So the first path is to make your existing code more Dask aware. And so we're going to touch on a existing refactor that happened on XHISTOGRAM, one of those sort of domain specific packages that Ryan was talking about. So that's one path, is to make your code more Dask aware. And the other option is to, well, improve Dask. So make upstream contributions to actually improve the underlying tech stack. Next slide. Awesome. Thanks, Ryan. So yeah, I wanted to talk about the first path first. So refactoring XHISTOGRAM. So for those who don't know, XHISTOGRAM is a library. It has a really nice API that is for histogramming, histogramming NumPy array and X-array data sets. This is nice, in particular the X-array part, because it makes your histograms label aware, which is super convenient. XHISTOGRAM, because it worked with X-array, and because it had its own implementation of working with Dask arrays, already supported Dask. So X-array or XHISTOGRAM already worked with Dask arrays as inputs, but users were reporting some performance issues. So things weren't working as smoothly as they would like. This is kind of pushing up against those rough edges of the project that I was referencing in the previous slide. So Ryan's group and folks at Coiled worked to refactor XHISTOGRAM to actually be more Dask aware. So I'm linking, I have a little screenshot. The top screenshot is actually just of the corresponding PR, which is linked to in the slides here. Specifically, we refactored XHISTOGRAM to use a lower level interface for implementing its histogramming algorithms on Dask arrays. Dask has several of these low-level interfaces for actually building your own custom sort of blockwise algorithms. I linked to a place in the Dask documentation that refers to several of the sort of lower-level API methods there. In this case, we actually used, for folks on the call who may be familiar, we use Dask's blockwise implementation. So this is a nice way to sort of generalize inner and outer products in a symbolic notation that produces these really compact task graphs that just give you really great performance. So we refactored XHISTOGRAM to use this blockwise API. So yeah, I also linked to a tutorial that Julia Signell, another Dask maintainer, and myself gave at the Dask Summit, I think last year, and also PyCon, called Hacking Dask. And it provides a deeper dive into a variety of things. But one of those is these lower level interfaces for producing your own algorithms. So it goes into blockwise, it goes into map blocks, map overlap, things like that. So folks may find that interesting if you want to learn more about this topic. Next slide. Yeah, so that was sort of the first path, was improving, I'll say, like the domain specific, or improving your code, say. The other option is to, or another option is to improve upstream. So in this case, improve how Dask actually works. So I'm linking to another PR here where we had an upstream improvement that was evident in, well, it was basically a scheduling issue that was, or scheduling lack of performance issue in lots of the workloads that Ryan and his group and sort of oceanographers more broadly were running into. So we actually, what happened is there's actually, you would submit your computation, you would see a ton of, for relatively simple graphs, you would see a ton of communication. So we would have workers sending dependencies from one worker to another. This would result in copies on both workers. So you'd have excess memory usage and lots of transfer, which is generally slow. Earlier when Ryan was showing the task stream for that computation and said, this is a good looking task graph. One of the sort of definitions of nice looking task graph is you don't see a bunch of red in it. Red in the task graph is sort of it's where Dask is sending dependencies from one worker to another, and that's generally a slow process. So it's best to avoid that where we can. So there's this PR upstream in the distributed scheduler, which actually inspects the graph structure more than Dask previously did to find opportunities where we can actually schedule tasks all to be on the same worker. And this is a way to avoid sort of that future transferring of dependencies. Matt Rockland actually put together a really great, I think it's the video is like eight minutes long that I linked to there on YouTube, that goes through an explanation of the actual sort of problem that was faced here, as well as the sort of solution to that. Yeah, so this has, as I said, Ryan and lots of other oceanographers run into this type of issue. So this definitely sort of improves their day-to-day life, but it also improves lots of other folks. There are other people in different fields in finance, in other areas of research who run into this similar scheduling problem, and they all now benefit from this work, which is great. This has a really broad impact. Next slide. All right, I'll hand it back to you.
Sure, yeah. So I guess just summing things up with some of the lessons we learned through this collaborative work with the Coiled folks. In general, when our Dask code fails, it's usually due to workers running out of memory. And so we're really happy to see some of these upstream improvements to Dask memory management. We think that's just, in a short time, less than a year, we've seen really measurable improvements to the way Dask schedulers are managing memory, and that has real impacts on our work. As far as our application code, we've learned a lot of lessons about how to use Dask efficiently, and it generally comes down to creating fewer tasks and creating more efficient graphs. And that has required us to become more sophisticated Dask users, understanding some of the internals and the lower level APIs like Blockwise, which is really kind of this superpower layer of working with Dask. And so if other people in the audience have come up against some of these limits, this is a really promising direction for you to sort of potentially level up as a Dask user. Sort of just switching to the sort of broader sort of social side of this, I really think academic researchers like us and open source companies should collaborate more. This was a great project for all of us. I think we made really efficient use of our funding because we were able to get some time from these top, open source engineers from Coiled, and they were able to focus on our problem in a way that had an impact not just for our narrow use case, but also, for the upstream tools, Dask itself, which then has a lot of residual benefits so for science funders who are looking to have an impact on tooling with their, limited funding budgets, I think this is a model that we should really be exploring more. And in this case, specifically, we really appreciated the professional support services from Coiled. They're really effective at sort of getting to the bottom of our issues and helping us identify, how to accelerate our workloads. So that's the end of the talk here. Maybe just check in on our computation here. It finished. So we got the results. So let's we can plot it.
It's exactly like a cooking show. Here's a cake out of the oven.
You know, all live demos, of course, have to have an error, right? So I just got one. So maybe we turn to the questions. Oh, I know what I have to do. I just have to do mask out log color plots. Don't like when you have zeros in them. So here we go. That's our final histogram. You can see it's much smoother, and it really shows the full distribution of the data over 14,000 different time steps and 6 terabytes of data. So it worked. The demo worked.
So some people said Mediterranean, Dead Sea. Was that correct, Ryan?
Exactly, yeah. And you can see it here. So this is the Mediterranean here. This is a high salinity sort of outlier in the global ocean. I just find it really fascinating to see how the ocean sort of stratifies itself out in this temperature salinity space. And so this is why I think histograms are just one of the most powerful tools for exploratory data analysis, whether you're doing oceanography or doing, I don't know, finance, just to use finance as our example of another field, right? And so we actually really like this XHISTOGRAM package, and I think, I don't know, maybe people will learn about it through this webinar too and try it out for themselves. I'll stop sharing so we can move into the discussion.
The questions, yeah. So first of all, I will answer the question of, are these slides and notebook will be available? Yes, you will receive an email from me sometime today with everything. And now we're gonna look at the questions. Ryan and James, there are quite a few very good questions, I think, in the chat room. If you can kind of skim through them and make a decision. But for those of you who we may not get to, again, at the top of the chat box, there is a link there to schedule a meeting if we haven't responded to your question. So Ryan, do you see a couple of questions that you want to refer to?
Okay, I'm looking through this now. Let's see.
I might jump in. I see a good one.
Yep.
If you don't mind, Ryan. So yeah, Richard asks, a recurring question is how to use Dask efficiently. Is there a good reference tutorial, or is that too much of a moving target? And yeah, like too much of a moving target is totally fair. Like there's a lot to learn, but I will say there are a few, it kind of depends on where you are on your Dask journey. So like if you're new to Dask, I would say the Dask tutorial. If you go to tutorial.dask.org, is a great sort of starting out with Dask resource. I think good next steps after you've sort of are in the intermediate or advanced stage is to go to that Hacking Dask tutorial that was linked to in a previous slide. I think that's actually a good resource. There's notebooks online, so we link to a GitHub repository, and then there's also a recording if you prefer that format for learning as well. And then the last thing I'll do is the Dask documentation actually has a few best practices. These are each of the best practices kind of spun out from a like variety of user questions and issues being raised, trying to, these best practices try to sort of address large themes here. So I linked in the documentation to best practices, like there's a top level best practices for Dask as a whole. And then if you care about arrays or data frames or delay, depending on the user interface you care most about, the top of that page actually links to specific best practices for arrays or data frames or delayed. So anyways, those are some resources, Richard. Hopefully you find those useful.
And I'll add one other sort of specific area that we find where we find we accidentally are creating too many tasks, and it usually involves indexing, right? So like often we'll take an array, like usually through X-array, but it actually doesn't matter if it's through X-array, sort of index it, like slice part of it and recombine it with the original array in some way. And if you do that just using the sort of naive Dask array API, it'll create sort of many subtasks for all of that. However, if all of those indexing operations are essentially happening within one chunk, and you're not trying to combine data from multiple chunks, it can be a lot more efficient to put that all in a function and apply it using map blocks. And so that's like a pattern we've been shifting to. I am curious whether it's in scope for Dask sort of optimizations to figure out how to fuse those type of optimizations. I think right now the optimizers aren't necessarily aware, like if you're doing an indexing operation, like that you're doing indexing, like they're not really aware of sort of the array semantics of whatever is going on. So that would probably require like a pretty major change to the way Dask optimizes things. Would have to be sort of a little bit more aware of the underlying data model. And I don't know if that's in scope, but in general, our trajectory has been to use map blocks more and more, and to use like sort of custom sort of indexing code on Dask arrays less and less.
That's great. I see a question, for example, I think Ryan, it's interesting because PANGEO came about this way. Diane is asking, I love the idea of more collaboration between researchers and open source companies. How best to encourage this? Any advice?
Well, so fortunately, it's actually pretty easy. Like it doesn't necessarily require a lot of any policy changes from like the National Science Foundation or anything. The way we do this is we just put into our grants, we put like a consulting budget for open source software development services. Order $50,000 to $100,000, say out of a $500,000 budget, right? So order 10%. We find this to be so effective, especially when we have good partners like Coiled or many of the other companies out there. And I would mention some of the others. We worked with Anaconda for a really long time. QuantSight is really active in this space. MakePath is focused on geospatial. So there are a lot of companies out there that can actually do this type of development, on contract or through a support contract. And all you have to do is write it into your grant, and then you can, generally no one is like saying no to this. It's just that the PI who's writing the grant has to, decide to do that. And it's often a choice between doing that or trying to hire, say, a postdoc or a research software engineer to work on that project. And, not only is it more expensive to hire a full-time employee to work on a software project, but we have a lot of challenges in hiring for those roles in academia. That's something we're trying to change and improve the culture for research software engineers in academia. But in the meantime, if you need to get something done, and I think this is a great model to use and encourage.
That's awesome. I think you answered that, but please correct me. Yedidia is asking, can you please elaborate more on creating fewer tasks? Maybe give an example or two. We talked about that, correct?
Yeah, I think Ryan's example.
I wasn't sure. Yep. I think we got through most.
Someone had a question about Dask histogram versus XHISTOGRAM. And that's come up before. And there's actually quite a lot of accelerated histogram projects out there. Will they converge? As far as I know, so Dask histogram seems really cool, and we should talk to them and understand that. Our use case is pretty unique in the sense that we'll have like a multi-dimensional array with, say, dimensions latitude, longitude, and time. We'll have multiple variables, and we'll want to take the histogram of the data just along, and potentially joint histograms, weighted joint histograms along just some dimensions of the array. So we want to take the histogram along latitude and longitude, but leave the time axis. And so that way we can explore, for example, how the distribution changes in time. Almost every histogram tool out there starts by flattening multidimensional arrays and then just tries to take the histogram of all of them, of the entire array. And at that point, once you've flattened it, you've lost all the information about dimensionality, like multiple different dimensions. And so Dask histogram doesn't support that. NumPy's built-in histograms don't support that. It's really something we needed to make that's custom. And I'm surprised that none of these tools support it, because it's actually a really useful way to analyze multidimensional data. But that's basically the technical reason why it's distinct from Dask histogram. Maybe we could merge. I mean, I would like to see just one, and I actually think this could go into Xarray proper. And we've talked about trying to bring the XHistogram is basically just one function. The API is one function. So like we've talked about bringing it into Xarray, and that's conceivable.
There's another one maybe for James. I'm not sure. We might not have the answer here. Anyone know? Gregory is asking, anyone know where I can find a good implementation of a classic geospatial zone stats algorithm using Dask? We may have to come back to Gregory. That's no problem. everyone were looking at the Mediterranean. That's really good. Everybody knew that. So I think, oh, is it worth implementing Dask on the 100 gigabyte scale, or just easier to throw more compute?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I have a little bit of a question. Well, really the answer is like, can 100 gigabytes, do you have 100 gigabytes of memory floating around? If you do, maybe you could use it on one box. I think that's what you might be getting at as throwing more compute at it. It really depends on, I mean, in general, yes. So Dask is useful for scaling out larger than memory. If you have a giant box of 100 gigabytes, that's great. You don't have to necessarily use Dask or some other scaling technology in that way. That being said, you might still find things slow. Like for instance, using an example being pandas read CSV to read in like 100 gigabytes CSV file. You may want to chunk that up and read that in parallel. So yeah, it definitely would still be applicable to use Dask in that case.
Cool. Last question from John. How important is understanding the access patterns over exploratory analysis before organizing the data layout in ZAR? I think that's for you, Ryan.
This is one of these perpetual topics. ZAR is a chunked array storage format. So if you already use Dask, and particularly the Dask array module, you're very familiar with this concept of chunks, right? We take a really big array and we split it up into different chunks, and then we write a parallel algorithm that operates on those chunks and usually reduces them somehow. ZAR is a chunked array storage format that we use that is plays very well with cloud object storage. And when you're persisting data using ZAR, you have to make a choice about how you're going to lay out these chunks. Should you chunk along, the time dimension or the longitude dimension? And a lot of people kind of throw up their hands when they see this and say, well, how am I supposed to decide? Like the first response is, all of our data are chunked in some way. It's just not always explicit. Whenever you're working with an array, there are certain bytes that are stored closer together in memory and other bytes that are farther apart in memory. And often if you're working with many gigabytes or terabytes of data, the data are actually split over many individual files. Like if you're using a legacy format, netcdf or HDF or something like that. So there's always chunking there. And the way the data are stored on disk is going to affect the performance of the algorithm. A lot of people want there to exist a sort of holy grail chunk format that is optimized for every possible use case. Doesn't exist today. I still hope that someone will develop one, but there's fundamental reasons why that's hard. So how important is understanding the access pattern of exploratory analysis before you start organizing the data layout in ZAR? The answer is it's very important. And you need to think about what the use case is. So in my example, I wanted to show you maps of this data because that's how we relate to spatial data. We will look at it on a map. So that data is chunked in the space dimension and it's basically contiguous. So sorry, it's chunked in time, it's contiguous in space. But that makes it very inefficient for me to do a time series analysis just at one point. And so there's ways to mitigate this. We're working within ZAR on improving the internal storage so that it's easier to pull out subsets within a single chunk. But I think another great solution is just to make multiple copies of the data. So we have developed this library called ReChunker, which is really designed to specifically for this problem a lot of us face, where we have one chunk structure, we want another one. ReChunker actually uses Dask for scheduling, and it will just copy the array with one chunk structure to a new array with another chunk structure. And so, if you combine that with aggressive compression, if you can compress your data just by a factor of 2x, you've just bought yourself another copy of the same data. So we think the way forward is probably actually to use aggressive compression on these really large arrays together with actually storing multiple copies with different chunk structures that are optimized for different use cases. And ReChunker makes it relatively easier to work that way. And many people in our community work that way today.
That's wonderful. And then Darren has a follow-up, which is, does ZAR perform better on Google Object Storage than AWS S3? If so, why?
We haven't found any measurable difference in performance between any of the object storage providers. All of this is IO limited. So it's really just how fast are you serving data up? What's the throughput of the network? The goal for all of this IO stuff is to just saturate whatever network you're on. That's why we tend to scale out in the cloud, maybe even before would be needed. Like the analysis I showed you, I used 300 gigabytes of RAM and 30 workers, right? So I could have just gotten a big single machine with, say, 300 gigs of RAM and 32 CPU cores. Like Google Cloud or Amazon it's no problem to like get a virtual machine of that size. But why don't I do it in this use case? Because the IO throughput to that single machine is limited. So we actually prefer, contrary to some advice you read some places about how to do distributed computing, we scale out relatively soon because all our analysis is IO bound. And so having more distributed workers on different virtual machines maximizes the network saturation and allows us to pull data from object storage as quickly as possible. So that's why we generally tend to use that packages of relatively small workers, but lots of them, because we can suck data out of the object store as fast as possible that way.